During our third anniversary dinner, Eli casually mentioned that our credit cards were maxed out when I brought up taking a dream vacation. It felt like a punch to the gut. We had always been careful with money, so hearing this caught me completely off guard. "What do you mean the cards are maxed out?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Eli shrugged nonchalantly. "It's no big deal, babe. I've just been hitting the casino a little harder than usual lately, but it's under control." My mind was racing. How could he have racked up so much debt without me knowing? And gambling? That was a side of him I'd never seen before. Over the next few days, I dug deeper into our finances. The truth was even worse than I'd imagined. Eli had taken out multiple credit cards and loans, all to fuel his gambling addiction. We were hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. When I confronted him, he broke down, admitting everything. He had been struggling with a gambling problem for over a year and had been too ashamed to tell me. The tears streaming down his face almost made me feel sorry for him. Almost. "We have to file for bankruptcy," I said, my voice shaking with anger and disappointment. "There's no other way out of this mess." Eli shook his head adamantly. "No, there's another option. My brother Cal. We can transfer the house to his name temporarily. That way, it's protected from the creditors until I can get back on my feet." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You want to lie to your own brother and risk losing our home?" "Absolutely not." But Eli was relentless, begging and pleading until I finally caved. I knew it was a terrible idea, but I was desperate to save our marriage and finances. Little did I know, it was just the beginning of Eli's betrayal. Despite my reservations, I went through with Eli's plan to temporarily transfer our house to his brother Cal's name. I tried to convince myself that he was doing this to protect our assets, that it really was just a short-term solution until he got back on his feet. When we met with Cal and his wife Darcy to explain the situation, I could barely look them in the eye. Eli did most of the talking, spinning his web of lies about needing to protect our home from creditors while he sorted out some business issues. "I don't understand," Darcy said, her brow furrowed with concern. "Why do you need to put the house in Cal's name? Can't you just file for bankruptcy?" Eli flashed her his most charming smile. "It's just a temporary measure, sweetheart. We'll have everything sorted out in a few months, and then we'll transfer it right back. You don't need to worry your pretty little head about it." I cringed at his condescending tone, but Darcy seemed to accept his explanation. Cal, however, looked uneasy. He pulled me aside while Eli and Darcy chatted in the other room. "You sure about this, Rowan?" he asked, his voice low. "It seems a little shady, even for my brother." I forced a smile, trying to quell the growing knot of doubt in my stomach. "It'll be fine, Cal. Just a few months, and then everything will be back to normal." Famous last words. Over the next few weeks, Eli's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He was gone for days at a time, claiming he was working on sorting out our financial mess. When he was home, he was irritable and distant, snapping at me over the smallest things. One night, as he stumbled in well past midnight, reeking of booze and perfume that wasn't mine, I knew the truth. He was having an affair. I confronted him, and he didn't even try to deny it. "What did you expect, Rowan?" He slurred, his words laced with venom. "You think I was going to stay faithful to a pathetic, nagging wife like you?" In that moment, I realized I had made the biggest mistake of my life by trusting him. But I also knew that I couldn't just roll over and let him destroy me. It was time to fight back. After Eli's drunken confession about his affair, I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Not only had he lied about our finances and put our home at risk, but he had also betrayed our marriage vows in the most despicable way. In a daze, I spent the next few days trying to piece together what to do next. I consulted with a lawyer, hoping there was a way out of this mess. But the news was grim. Because we had transferred the house to Cal's name, and with Eli's extensive debts, I had very limited options. "The best thing you can do is try to gather as much evidence as possible," the lawyer advised. "Proof of his financial misdeeds, the affair, anything that can help build a case against him." So that's what I did. I became a private investigator in my own life, documenting every lie, every shady transaction, every sign of Eli's infidelity. I even managed to get copies of his credit card statements, revealing just how deep his gambling addiction ran. Meanwhile, Eli continued to spiral out of control. He was gone more nights than not, coming home reeking of booze and another woman's perfume. I stopped asking where he'd been or trying to reason with him. It was clear he was too far gone. The one bright spot in this whole mess was my newfound friendship with Darcy. As Cal's wife, she had been just as blindsided by Eli's schemes as I was. We bonded over our shared sense of betrayal, and she became my confidant, helping me gather evidence and offering a shoulder to cry on. "I can't believe Cal was mixed up in all of this," she said one day, shaking her head in disbelief. "He's always been the responsible one." I squeezed her hand, understanding her pain all too well. Eli has a way of manipulating people. He fooled us both. As the weeks passed, my anger towards Eli only grew stronger, not just for what he had done to me, but for dragging his own brother into his web of lies. Cal and Darcy didn't deserve to be collateral damage in his selfish quest for self-destruction. That's when I started to formulate a plan. I was done being the victim. It was time for Eli to face the consequences of his actions, and I was going to make sure he paid for every single lie. As the weeks dragged on, Eli's behavior only grew more erratic and destructive. He was rarely home, and when he was either passed out drunk or raging about something inconsequential. I started staying with Darcy more often than not, just to avoid his toxic presence. "You can't keep living like this," Darcy said one night as we split a bottle of wine on her patio. "He's going to drag you down with him if you're not careful." I took a long sip, the bitter liquid burning my throat. "I know. Believe me, I want out of this marriage more than anything. But he's made it impossible for me to leave." Darcy's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean? Surely there's a way to divorce his sorry ass and get your house back." Shaking my head, I explained how Eli had me transfer the deed to Cal, making it nearly impossible for me to claim ownership again. As the words left my mouth, I could see the realization dawn on Darcy's face. "That son of a bitch," she hissed. "He used my husband too. Oh, he is going to pay for this." In that moment, I felt a renewed sense of determination. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for Darcy and Cal too. For the first time in months, I felt like I had an ally in my corner, someone who understood the depth of Eli's betrayal. Over the next few weeks, Darcy and I became co-conspirators, gathering every shred of evidence we could find against Eli. Bank statements, credit card bills, phone records, nothing was off limits. We built a mountain of proof detailing his reckless gambling, his affair, and his financial deceit. "We're going to nail that bastard to the wall," Darcy vowed, her voice steely with resolve. I believed her. With each new piece of evidence we uncovered, I could feel the shackles of Eli's control loosening. I was no longer a helpless victim. I was a woman on a mission for justice. The final straw came when I stumbled across a receipt for an expensive piece of jewelry, clearly a gift for his mistress. As I stared at the damning slip of paper, something inside me snapped. I was done being the scorned wife, crying in the shadows while Eli flaunted his infidelity. It was time to burn his world to the ground. It was the perfect opportunity, a big family gathering at Cal and Darcy's house for Darcy's birthday. Eli would be there, smug and oblivious as ever, but this time I was ready for him. As everyone gathered in the backyard, laughing and making small talk, I caught Eli's eye from across the lawn. He gave me a mocking smirk, raising his beer in a mock salute. My blood boiled, but I forced a smile in return. This was all part of the plan. Once we were all settled around the patio table, I cleared my throat loudly, drawing everyone's attention. "Before we start eating, I have something to share with all of you," I announced, my voice surprisingly steady. "Something you all deserve to know." Eli shot me a warning glare, but I pressed on. "For months now, my husband has been lying to us. To all of us." I turned to Cal and Darcy, feeling a pang of guilt for what I was about to reveal. "He manipulated you into putting our house in your name, Cal, all because he's drowning in debt from his gambling addiction." Gasps rippled through the gathering as I laid out the evidence. Bank statements, credit card bills, everything Darcy and I had painstakingly gathered. Eli's face turned a mottled shade of red, but I didn't stop there. "And if that wasn't enough," I continued, "he's also been carrying on an affair for months now. With some cheap mistress, he's been showering with expensive gifts bought with money he doesn't even have." I held up the damning jewelry receipt, letting it do the talking. Eli jumped to his feet, spewing denials and curses, but no one was listening. The truth was out in the open, laid bare for everyone to see. Cal looked like he'd been punched in the gut, while Darcy was practically trembling with rage. The rest of the family just stared in stunned silence, unable to process the depth of Eli's betrayal. Through it all, I remained stoic, allowing the evidence to speak for itself. When I was finished, I turned to Eli, meeting his hate-filled glare with an icy calm. "You're done ruining my life," I said, my voice low but laced with steel. "It's over. You've lost everything." To his credit, Eli didn't go down without a fight. He ranted and raved, hurling insults and accusations like a cornered animal. But in the end, it didn't matter. The truth was out and there was no walking it back. As the party dispersed in stunned silence, I felt an unexpected sense of peace wash over me. The weight I'd been carrying for months had finally lifted, and in that moment, I knew I'd won. Eli could rage and bluster all he wanted, but his games were over. He'd lost control, and there was no getting it back. Not this time. After the explosive reveal at Darcy's birthday party, the legal battle began in earnest. With Cal's support and testimony, I hired a shark of a lawyer to take Eli down once and for all. The first order of business was getting the house back in my name. My lawyer made a strong case that the transfer to Cal had been done under false pretenses and coercion by Eli. To my relief, the judge agreed. Eli's lies and manipulation were undeniable given the mountain of evidence we presented. Mr. Grayson clearly had no intention of this being a temporary measure. The judge stated sternly, his actions were a deliberate attempt to defraud his wife and conceal assets from creditors. The property will be returned to Mrs. Grayson's name immediately. I had to fight back tears of relief as the gavel came down. After months of feeling trapped and hopeless, I finally had my home, my security back. But we weren't done yet. Not by a long shot. The next phase was going after Eli for his various financial crimes, the hidden debts, the shady loans, even his gambling losses. My lawyer was relentless, digging up every shred of evidence to bury him. During one particularly heated court session, Eli's lawyer tried to paint me as a vindictive, scorned wife out for revenge. He might as well have been speaking Greek for all the good it did him. "Your client is a con man and a liar who systematically robbed his wife of her financial security to fuel his vices," my lawyer fired back, his voice booming in the courtroom. "He has no one to blame but himself for the consequences of his reprehensible actions." Eli shot me a venomous glare from across the room, but I simply met his gaze with an icy stare. He had no power over me anymore. In the end, the judge saw right through Eli's desperate attempts at playing the victim. He was found guilty on multiple counts of fraud, financial crimes, and concealing assets. Not only would he face potential jail time, but he was also ordered to pay me a hefty settlement, one that would ensure I never had to worry about money again. As we walked out of the courthouse that final day, Eli brushed past me, his expression a mask of pure hatred. "You're going to regret this," he hissed under his breath. "You haven't seen the last of me." I simply laughed in his face. "I already have everything I want, Eli. You've got nothing left to take from me." Finally free of his toxic grasp, I could breathe again. The long, dark tunnel of our marriage was finally behind me, and the future looked brighter than ever. Eli could make all the empty threats he wanted. He was a ghost of the past, a cautionary tale of how low a person could sink. As for me, I was just getting started on the rest of my life. In the aftermath of my legal victory over Eli, everything seemed to crumble around him at lightning speed. It was almost dizzying to watch. First, his mistress caught wind of the whole sordid affair and dropped him like a bad habit. Apparently, she wasn't too keen on being with a broke, disgraced loser after all. Who would have thought? Then the professional fallout began. Eli had worked in real estate, and word travels fast in that world. As soon as the details of his fraud and deception hit the news, no reputable agency would touch him with a 10-foot pole. His career was essentially over before it could really begin. Meanwhile, I was just getting started on rebuilding my life without his toxic presence weighing me down. With the generous settlement from the court case, I was able to pay off what remained of Eli's debt and still had plenty left over. Cal and Darcy were incredibly supportive throughout everything. I'll never forget the day Darcy showed up at my door with a bottle of champagne and the biggest grin on her face. "We're throwing you a party," she announced, "to celebrate you getting that scumbag out of our lives for good." The party ended up being a total rager, with friends and family coming from all over to raise a glass to my fresh start. Even Cal's stoic demeanor couldn't hide his relieved smile as we clinked drinks. "I'm just glad that whole nightmare is over," he said. "You deserve so much better, Rowan." As I looked around at the smiling faces surrounding me, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. If it hadn't been for these amazing people having my back, I might never have found the strength to stand up to Eli. In the months that followed, I watched from the sidelines as Eli's life continued its downward spiral. More legal troubles and unpaid debts seemed to pile up by the week. He had burned every bridge and scorched every connection he'd once had. The worst punishment of all? Being forced to watch me actually thrive without him around. I could see it in his eyes whenever we encountered each other, that seething resentment that I had somehow won. But what he failed to realize was that I had already won the second I broke free from his toxic grip. The money, the house, all of that was just icing on the cake. After years of lying and cheating, Eli had nobody left but himself. Poetic justice at its finest. As for me, I had everything I could ever want: my freedom, my independence, and a priceless support system of people who truly cared about me. With their encouragement, I even started exploring new career opportunities that I never would have considered before. It was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, allowing me to spread my wings and finally live life on my own terms, and I had no plans of letting anyone clip those wings ever again. The renovations on the house were finally complete, and I couldn't be more thrilled with how it turned out. It was like a physical manifestation of my new life. Out with the old, in with a fresh start. As I stepped back to admire the sleek new kitchen, with its modern appliances and marble countertops, I felt a surge of pride. This was my sanctuary, my clean slate. No more ghosts of the past lingering in every corner. "What do you think?" I asked Darcy, who had become my unofficial design consultant over the past few months. "Worth all the dust and noise?" She let out an appreciative whistle. "Girl, it looks amazing. You totally nailed the whole effortlessly chic vibe." Laughing, I pulled her in for a hug. If it hadn't been for Darcy's unwavering support, I'm not sure I would have made it through those dark days intact. She was the sister I never had, and I was eternally grateful. Over the next few weeks, I settled into my new surroundings like a bear emerging from hibernation. Every morning, I'd make a cup of coffee and just soak in the peaceful ambiance of my beautifully remodeled home. No more chaos, no more negativity, just serene tranquility. Of course, Eli tried to rear his ugly head a few times during the process. He'd show up unannounced, ranting about how I had stolen the house from him. More than once, I had to threaten to call the cops to get him to leave. "You think this is over?" He'd snarl, his face twisted with rage. "I'm going to make your life a living hell until you give me what's mine." I'll admit there were moments when his threats shook me, stirring up those old feelings of dread and anxiety. But they never lasted long. I had worked too hard to reclaim my power to let him slither his way back into my head. "This is my home, Eli," I stated calmly after one of his outbursts. "A home and a life that you gambled away through your own selfish actions. Whatever hell you're living in now, that's on you, buddy." Eventually, his attempts to terrorize me became less frequent until they stopped altogether. The last I heard, he had fled the state, likely to escape the mountain of debts and legal troubles still hounding him. Good riddance. As for me, my new life was just beginning. With the house situation settled and that dark chapter finally closed, I started exploring new career opportunities. I wasn't interested in just treading water anymore. I was ready to dive in headfirst and chase bigger dreams. A few months later, I landed an incredible marketing job at a prestigious firm in the city. It was a huge step up, with better pay and opportunities for growth. More importantly, it allowed me to flex my creativity and talent in ways I hadn't experienced in years. On my first day, as I settled into my bright, airy new office, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I'd come. From the depths of Eli's betrayal and despair, I had clawed my way back to take control of my own narrative. No more living in someone else's shadow, No more sacrificing my dreams and self-worth for a relationship built on lies. This was my life now, and I was going to live it to the fullest, on my own terms. The future was a blank canvas, and I held the brush. Whatever I chose to create, to build from those ashes of my past, was entirely up to me. And this time, there was no one to stop me from painting my masterpiece. You think you can just waltz back into our lives with empty promises and a guilty conscience? The words spilled out of my mouth before I could stop them, my voice laced with years of pent-up resentment. I watched as my husband Declan flinched at my accusation, his carefully crafted facade cracking ever so slightly. For a moment, the man I'd once loved stood before me, exposed and vulnerable, a stark contrast to the charming, successful marketing executive he portrayed to the world. "Thea, please, let me explain," he pleaded, his eyes darting around our modest suburban home, as if searching for an escape. I crossed my arms, steeling myself against the flood of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. "Explain what, Declan? That you've been lying to me all this time? That you've been leading a double life?" The words hung in the air, the weight of their truth bearing down on us both. I couldn't help but wonder how long this had been going on, how many times Declan had betrayed my trust. My gaze drifted to our son Finn, who stood silently by my side, his hazel eyes narrowed with a wisdom and maturity far beyond his 15 years. The pain and confusion etched on his face made my heart clench. This wasn't how it was supposed to be, our little family, torn apart by Declan's selfish actions. "Mom, what's going on?" Finn asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What is he talking about?" I hesitated, not wanting to burden my son with the ugliness of his father's transgressions. But Finn deserved to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. "Your father has been—" I paused, struggling to find the right words. "He's been keeping secrets from us, Finn, secrets that are going to change our lives, whether we're ready or not." Declan took a step forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Thea, please, let's not involve Finn in this. This is between you and me." I let out a humorless laugh. "Between you and me? Don't you think Finn has a right to know what kind of man you really are?" I turned to my son, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Finn, your father has been having an affair. He's been living a double life, betraying our family." Finn's eyes widened, his expression a mix of shock and betrayal. "An affair? But how could you, Dad?" He shook his head, his voice trembling with emotion. "How could you do this to us?" Declan opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. For once, the silver-tongued charmer was at a loss for words. I took a step closer to Finn, wrapping my arm around him protectively. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way, Finn, but I promise you we're going to get through this, together." Finn nodded, his jaw set with a determination that belied his age. "What are we going to do, Mom?" I took a deep breath, my gaze unwavering as I stared down my husband. "We're going to fight. Declan's betrayal isn't just about me. It's about our family, our future, and I won't let him destroy everything we've built without a fight." Declan opened his mouth, but I raised my hand, silencing him. "Save it, Declan. The time for excuses and empty promises is over. Now it's time for you to face the consequences of your actions." The air was thick with tension as we stood there, 3 lives irrevocably changed by the unraveling of Declan's web of lies. But in that moment, I knew that Finn and I would emerge stronger, our bond forged in the crucible of adversity. This was our fight, and we were ready to win. The next few days were a blur of fury and determination. After Declan's botched attempt to smooth things over, I knew I couldn't trust him anymore. There was only one thing left to do: uncover the truth, no matter how ugly it might be. So, with Finn's help, I started digging. We followed Declan's movements, tracking his comings and goings, piecing together the fragments of his double life. It wasn't long before we stumbled upon a clue that would change everything. One evening, as Declan was leaving for another late night at the office, Finn and I decided to follow him. We trailed his car through the city streets, our hearts pounding in anticipation and dread. Finally, Declan pulled into an upscale apartment complex, one I didn't recognize. "This is it, Mom," Finn whispered, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Let's see what he's hiding." We waited, hidden in the shadows, as Declan let himself into the building. Minutes later, a young woman emerged, her blonde hair and designer clothes a stark contrast to the modest suburban housewife I had become. "Who is she?" Finn asked, his voice laced with anger. I shook my head, my own fury building. "I don't know, but I intend to find out." We watched as the woman entered Declan's car, and the two of them drove off together. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. Betrayal, rage, and a twinge of heartbreak swirled within me, each emotion fueling my determination to uncover the full extent of Declan's deception. "We need to get inside that apartment," I said, my gaze locked on the building. Finn nodded, already unbuckling his seatbelt. "I'm with you, Mom." We made our way to the apartment, and with a bit of lock-picking skill that Finn had picked up from a friend, we were inside. The place was immaculate, clearly maintained by someone with Declan's refined tastes. But it was the personal touches that made my blood boil. Framed photos of the woman, her belongings scattered throughout the space. "He's been living a double life," I murmured, the reality of the situation sinking in. "All this time, he's been deceiving us, betraying our family." Finn's jaw was clenched, his eyes burning with a righteous fury. "What are we going to do, Mom?" I took a deep breath, my mind racing with possibilities. "We're going to expose him, Finn. We're going to bring his whole world crashing down around him." "How?" Finn asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. I turned to him, a grim determination etched on my face. "We're going to plant the seeds of his downfall. We're going to use his own deceit against him, and we're going to make sure he pays for what he's done." Finn nodded, his expression mirroring my own. "I'm with you, Mom. Whatever it takes." We left the apartment. The evidence of Declan's infidelity burned into our minds. The drive home was silent, the weight of our newfound knowledge heavy upon our shoulders. But I knew that this was only the beginning. Declan's betrayal would not go unanswered, and I would stop at nothing to ensure that he faced the consequences of his actions. As we pulled into our driveway, I turned to Finn, my eyes meeting his. "Get ready, Finn. The storm is coming, and we're going to be the ones to weather it." The walls of our home seemed to close in on me as Finn and I returned from our investigation. The reality of Declan's betrayal weighed heavily, a dark cloud that threatened to consume us both. Finn was the first to break the silence. "Mom, what are we going to do?" I could hear the trepidation in his voice, the fear that his family was falling apart. He was just a child, yet he was forced to grapple with the ugly truth of his father's deception. "We're going to fight back," I said, my own voice steady and resolute. "Declan needs to be held accountable for what he's done." Finn's eyes widened, a flicker of hope sparking within them. "How? What's the plan?" I paused, weighing my words carefully. "We're going to use his own lies against him. We're going to expose his affair and the embezzlement at his company." Finn's brow furrowed. "Embezzlement? You think he's been stealing from his company?" I nodded grimly. "It's the only explanation for the lavish apartment and the way he's been living. Declan's always been good with numbers, and it wouldn't be hard for him to siphon off funds." Finn's expression shifted, the innocence of youth replaced by a steely determination. "Okay, what do we do?" I placed a hand on his shoulder, meeting his gaze. "Finn, this isn't going to be easy. What we're about to do could have serious consequences. Are you sure you're ready for this?" He didn't hesitate. "I'm with you, Mom, whatever it takes." I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride at his unwavering loyalty. Declan had betrayed us, but Finn and I would stand united, no matter the cost. "All right, here's what we're going to do." Over the next few days, Finn and I worked tirelessly, piecing together the evidence against Declan. We scoured his financial records, meticulously documenting the discrepancies and misappropriated funds. Alongside that, we set the stage for exposing his affair, planting breadcrumbs that would lead directly to his mistress. It was a delicate dance, one that required patience and precision. Finn proved to be an invaluable partner, his sharp mind and keen observation skills complementing my own. Together, we wove a web of deceit that would ensnare Declan, leaving him no choice but to face the consequences of his actions. As the final pieces fell into place, Finn and I stood in our living room, surveying the evidence before us. "Are you sure about this, Mom?" Finn asked, his eyes reflecting the weight of what we were about to do. I nodded, my resolve unwavering. Declan needs to pay for what he's done. This is the only way to ensure our family's future. Finn took a deep breath and then squared his shoulders. Okay, let's do this. With a few clicks of the mouse, the incriminating information was sent out into the world. Anonymous tips that would unleash the storm upon Declan's carefully constructed facade. In the quiet that followed, Finn and I stood together, our hands clasped tightly. We had taken the first step, and now the dominoes were set to fall. Whatever happened next, we would face it as a united front, mother and son, determined to reclaim our lives from the ashes of Declan's betrayal. The days that followed were filled with a tense anticipation, as Finn and I waited for the dominoes to fall. We knew that it was only a matter of time before Declan's world came crashing down around him, and we were both equal parts terrified and resolute. The first signs of the impending chaos came when Declan started acting strangely. He was distracted, his usual charm and confidence replaced by an underlying anxiety. I watched him, feigning ignorance as he made frantic phone calls and retreated to his study for hours on end. "Something's wrong," Finn whispered one evening as we sat in the living room pretending to watch TV. "Do you think he knows?" I placed a comforting hand on his arm. "If he does, he hasn't confronted us yet, but we need to be prepared for when he does." Finn nodded, his brow furrowed in concentration. "What's the next step?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. We need to plant the final piece of evidence, something that will irrevocably link Declan to the embezzlement and his affair. Finn's eyes widened, but he didn't flinch. "What do you have in mind?" "I've set up a false paper trail," I explained, my voice low and steady. "Documents that will implicate Declan in the embezzlement, with his mistress as the motive." Finn's expression shifted, a glimmer of unease crossing his features. "Mom, are you sure about this? I mean, we're essentially framing him." I reached out and squeezed his hand, my gaze unwavering. "I know, Finn, but Declan has left us no choice. He destroyed our family, and now he has to face the consequences." Finn nodded, his jaw set with determination. "Okay, let's do it." Together, we carefully planted the evidence, ensuring that it would be discovered at the most opportune moment. As we finished, a sense of finality settled over us, the weight of our actions palpable. "It's done," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Finn looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. "What now?" I pulled him into a tight hug, my own emotions threatening to spill over. "Now we wait, and when the time is right, we'll be there to watch Declan fall." The next few days were a blur of tension and anxiety. Declan's behavior grew more erratic, and I could see the strain taking its toll on him. Finn and I kept our heads down, acting as if nothing was amiss, but the anticipation was palpable. Then, the moment we had been waiting for arrived. Declan burst through the front door, his face contorted with rage and panic. "What the hell have you done?" he shouted, his eyes wild. I stood my ground, my expression calm and collected. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Declan." "Don't give me that crap, Thea," he spat, his hands trembling. "I know you're behind this. The company is investigating me, and they've found evidence of embezzlement, and—" He trailed off, the color draining from his face as he realized the full extent of his downfall. "And your affair," I finished, my voice laced with a quiet triumph. "Looks like the walls are closing in, Declan." Declan stared at me, his mouth agape, unable to form a coherent response. In that moment, I saw the man I had once loved for who he truly was, a coward, a liar, and a betrayer. Finn stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. "You brought this on yourself, Dad. Now you have to face the consequences." Declan opened his mouth, but no words came out. He turned and fled, the sound of his footsteps echoing through the house, a fitting symphony to the crumbling of his carefully constructed life. As the door slammed shut, Finn and I stood together, our eyes meeting in a silent understanding. The first phase of our plan was complete, and now the final act was about to unfold. The days that followed Declan's confrontation were charged with a tense and uneasy silence. Finn and I knew that the final act was about to unfold, and we steeled ourselves for the inevitable fallout. Declan, for his part, had become a shadow of his former self. Gone was the confident, charismatic man I had once loved. In his place was a desperate, cowering figure, constantly looking over his shoulder. I could see the fear in his eyes, the realization that his carefully constructed world was crumbling around him. One evening, as Finn and I sat in the living room, The sound of Declan's car pulling into the driveway sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I turned to Finn, my gaze unwavering. "It's time," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Finn nodded, his expression resolute. We moved to the front window, watching as Declan hurried up the path, his movements frantic and erratic. The front door burst open, and Declan stumbled inside, his eyes wild and his face twisted with anguish. "Thea! Finn!" he cried, his voice cracking with desperation. "What have you done?" I stepped forward, my arms crossed over my chest. "What are you talking about, Declan?" "Don't play dumb with me," he shouted, spittle flying from his lips. "The company knows about the embezzlement. They know about Elise." Finn tensed beside me, his jaw clenched tight. "So your little affair has finally caught up with you, huh, Dad?" Declan's gaze snapped to our son, his eyes wild with a mixture of fear and fury. "You two? You did this, didn't you? How could you?" I held up a hand, silencing him. "We did what we had to do, Declan. You brought this on yourself." "But I'm your husband," he bellowed, his voice echoing through the house. "How could you do this to me?" "You lost the right to be our husband and father the moment you betrayed us," I said, my voice steady and unwavering. "You destroyed our family, Declan. Now you have to face the consequences." Declan's knees buckled, and he collapsed to the floor, his head cradled in his hands. "Please, Thea, Finn, you have to help me. I can't lose everything." Finn stepped forward, his expression hardening. "You should have thought about that before you started lying and cheating. Now it's too late." Declan looked up at us, his eyes pleading. "I'll do anything. Please, just help me." I shook my head, my heart hardening against the man I once loved. "It's too late for that, Declan. The die has been cast." The sound of a car pulling into the driveway made us all freeze. Declan's face paled, and he scrambled to his feet, his eyes darting around the room in a desperate search for an escape. "That's her," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Elise." I watched as the front door opened, and a young woman stepped inside, her expression a mixture of confusion and concern. "Declan, what's going on?" she asked, her gaze sweeping over the scene before her. Declan moved towards her, his hands outstretched. "Elise, you have to help me. Thea and Finn, they've—" But before he could finish, a barrage of text messages and emails began to flood Elise's phone. She looked down, her eyes widening as she read the messages, her expression shifting from confusion to fury. "Declan, what is this?" she demanded, her voice rising in pitch. "Embezzlement? Affair?" Declan's face crumpled, and he reached for her, but Elise recoiled, slapping him across the face. "You lied to me," she spat, her eyes brimming with tears. "All this time you were using me." Declan cowered, his once proud demeanor shattered. "Elise, please, I can explain." But Elise was already turning towards the door, her steps quickening with each passing moment. "It's over, Declan," she called out, her voice thick with disgust. "I want nothing to do with you." And with that, she was gone, leaving Declan alone, his world collapsing around him. Finn and I watched, our expressions stoic, as the final dominoes fell, and Declan's reckoning had arrived. The fallout from Declan's downfall was swift and unforgiving. In the days following the confrontation at our home, the evidence we had so meticulously planted began to surface, sending shockwaves through his company and personal life. Finn and I watched with a mixture of triumph and unease as the revelations unfolded. Declan's embezzlement scheme had been uncovered, with a paper trail leading directly back to him. His affair with the younger colleague Elise had also been exposed, her angry tirades and accusations splashed across social media for all to see. The company's executives were swift to act, convening an emergency board meeting to discuss the shocking allegations against their star marketing executive. Finn and I positioned ourselves strategically, ensuring we would have a front-row seat to Declan's downfall. As the meeting commenced, the tension in the room was palpable. Declan, once the picture of confidence and control, sat hunched in his chair, his eyes darting around the room in a futile search for a way out. "Mr. Langston," the CEO began, his voice grave, "we've received some disturbing information regarding your conduct at the company. Allegations of embezzlement and an inappropriate relationship with a colleague. Do you have any explanation for these serious charges?" Declan's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. He was trapped, his carefully constructed facade crumbling before our very eyes. I don't know what to say," he stammered, his usual eloquence deserting him. The CEO's expression hardened. Perhaps you'd like to explain the substantial transfers of company funds into a personal account, or the considerable sums spent on lavish gifts and trips for this colleague of yours. Declan swallowed hard, his face pale and drawn. I can explain. It's not what it seems. I was just trying to. Save it, Declan, the CEO interrupted, his voice dripping with contempt. The evidence against you is overwhelming. You've betrayed the trust of this company and your family. As of this moment, you are terminated from your position, and we will be pursuing legal action against you. The room erupted into a cacophony of voices, executives shouting and demanding answers, the sound of Declan's world crashing down around him. Finn gripped my hand, his eyes shining with a mixture of relief and vindication. It's happening, Mom. He's getting what he deserves. I squeezed his hand, my own expression grim. Yes, Finn, but this is only the beginning. As the meeting descended into chaos, I scanned the room, searching for any sign of Elise. It wasn't long before I spotted her, her face a mask of fury and betrayal. Declan caught sight of her, his eyes widening in panic. Elise, please, you have to help me. You know I love you. We can... But Elise cut him off, slapping him hard across the face. How dare you, Declan? You used me, lied to me, and now you expect me to help you. You're pathetic. Declan recoiled, his hand clutching his reddened cheek. Elise, please. I can make this right. We can... There is no we, Declan. Elise spat, her voice trembling with emotion. We're done. I want nothing more to do with you or your twisted little family. With that, Elise turned on her heel and stormed out of the room, leaving Declan to face the consequences of his actions alone. As the executives continued to berate and interrogate Declan, Finn and I watched in silence, our plan unfolding flawlessly. The dominoes were falling one by one, and Declan's world was crumbling around him. In that moment, I knew that our long-awaited revenge was at hand. Declan had betrayed us, and now he would pay the price. The echoes of his betrayal would reverberate through his life, a haunting reminder of the consequences of his actions. The days that followed Declan's public downfall were a whirlwind of chaos and upheaval. As the investigation into his embezzlement and affair deepened, the once respected marketing executive found himself stripped of his job, his reputation, and the life he had so carefully crafted. Finn and I watched from the sidelines, our expressions a mix of grim satisfaction and a hint of unease. We had engineered Declan's downfall, but the weight of our actions still lingered, a constant reminder of the difficult choices we had been forced to make. The news of Declan's transgressions spread like wildfire, splashed across headlines and social media. His colleagues, once admirers of his success, now turned on him with a vengeance, their disgust and outrage palpable. The company he had worked for unceremoniously severed all ties, leaving him to face the legal consequences of his actions alone. One afternoon, as Finn and I sat in our living room, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find a distraught Elise, her eyes red and puffy from crying. Thea, I need to talk to you, she said, her voice trembling. I hesitated, unsure of how to respond. Elise, what are you doing here? She pushed past me, her gaze wild and erratic. I can't believe this is happening. Declan, he's ruined everything. Finn appeared at my side, his expression wary. What do you want, Elise? Elise whirled around, her eyes flashing with a mixture of anger and desperation. I want to know why you did this. Why did you destroy Declan's life? I held up a hand, my voice calm and measured. Elise, Declan brought this upon himself. He betrayed our family, and we had to take action. But I loved him, Elise cried, her hands clenching into fists. I thought we had something real. How could he do this to me? Finn stepped forward, his expression hardening. Declan was using you, Elise. He's been lying and cheating his whole life. You were just one of his victims. Elise shook her head, her shoulders slumping in defeat. I can't believe it. All this time I thought he was the one. And now? She trailed off, a sob escaping her lips. I reached out, placing a hand on her arm. I'm sorry, Elise. I know this is difficult, but Declan's actions have consequences. You deserve better than him. Elise looked up at me, her eyes glistening with tears. I don't know what to do. My life is in shambles because of him. Finn stepped forward, his voice soft but resolute. You have to move on, Elise. Declan is going to face the full weight of the law for what he's done. You don't have to be a part of that. Elise nodded, her jaw clenching with determination. You're right. I can't let him drag me down, too. She turned to the door, pausing for a moment. Thank you, Thea. Finn, I hope you both can find a way to move on from this, too. With that, she was gone, leaving Finn and I alone once more. We stood in silence, the weight of our actions heavy on our shoulders. Do you think she'll be okay, Mom? Finn asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I sighed, pulling him into a tight hug. I hope so, Finn, but right now we need to focus on rebuilding our own lives. Finn nodded, his arms tightening around me. What about Dad? What's going to happen to him? I felt a twinge of regret, but it was quickly overshadowed by a steely resolve. Declan will have to face the consequences of his actions, Finn. The authorities are already closing in on him. It's time for him to pay for what he's done. Finn's grip on me tightened, and I knew that, despite the difficulty of our situation, we would emerge stronger. Declan's betrayal had shattered our family, but Finn and I would rebuild, stronger and more resilient than ever before. In the aftermath of Declan's downfall, Finn and I found ourselves grappling with a range of emotions, relief, sadness, and a glimmer of hope for a brighter future. The dust had settled, and while the scars of his betrayal remained, we were determined to move forward and reclaim our lives. As the legal proceedings against Declan unfolded, the full extent of his misdeeds became public knowledge. The embezzlement charges were staggering, and his affair with Elise only added to the tarnish on his reputation. Declan, once a respected and influential figure, now found himself shunned by his former colleagues and facing the very real possibility of a lengthy prison sentence. Despite the gravity of the situation, Finn and I took solace in the knowledge that justice was being served. Declan would have to answer for his crimes, and we could finally begin to heal and rebuild our lives without the burden of his lies and deceit. As the weeks turned to months, I found myself reconnecting with old friends and colleagues, my dedication to my nursing career becoming a source of pride and purpose. The promotion I had been working towards for years finally materialized, and I reveled in the validation of my hard work and resilience. Finn, too, blossomed in the absence of Declan's toxic influence. He threw himself into his studies, his grades soaring as he set his sights on prestigious colleges and universities. The light in his eyes had returned, and I could see the weight of the world slowly lifting from his shoulders. One evening, as Finn and I sat in our living room enjoying a rare moment of peace, the doorbell rang. I tensed, half expecting to see Declan on the other side pleading for our forgiveness. But when I opened the door, I was greeted by an unfamiliar face, a stern-looking police officer. "Mrs. Langston?" the officer asked, his voice neutral. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "Yes, that's me. What can I do for you, officer?" "I'm afraid I have some news regarding your husband, Declan," he said, his expression unreadable. Finn appeared at my side, his eyes filled with trepidation. "What happened?" The officer cleared his throat, his gaze shifting between us. "Mr. Langston has been sentenced to 5 years in prison for his crimes. The embezzlement and affair charges were substantial, and the judge deemed him a flight risk." I felt a wave of relief wash over me, quickly followed by a twinge of sadness. Declan had brought this upon himself, but the finality of his punishment was still a difficult reality to accept. "I see," I said, my voice steady. "Thank you for informing us, officer." The officer nodded, a hint of sympathy in his eyes. "If you have any questions or need assistance, please don't hesitate to contact us." With that, he turned and left, and Finn and I were left alone once more. I placed a hand on his shoulder, meeting his gaze. "It's over, Finn," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Declan's finally going to pay for what he's done." Finn nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I'm glad, Mom. I'm glad we fought back. I'm glad we didn't let him get away with it." I pulled him into a tight hug, a weight lifted from my shoulders. "Me too, Finn. Me too." In the days and weeks that followed, Finn and I continued to rebuild our lives, each day bringing new challenges and opportunities. I secured the promotion I had worked so hard for, and Finn excelled in his studies, his sights set on the future. As we sat together on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a sense of peace and resilience that I hadn't experienced in a long time. Declan's betrayal had shaken us, but it had also forged an unbreakable bond between Finn and me. We had weathered the storm, and now we were stronger for it. "You know, Finn," I said, my gaze fixed on the horizon. I'm proud of you. Proud of us. We've come a long way, haven't we? Finn reached over and squeezed my hand, his eyes shining with understanding. Yeah, Mom, we have, and I'm glad we did it together. In that moment, I knew that our future was bright and that no matter what obstacles lay ahead, Finn and I would face them side by side, our bond stronger than ever before.